Next, we're going to have Kealoha Pisciotta come up, and she's going to talk a little bit about her work at the United Nations and the definition of self-determination. So can we give Kealoha a big hand? She flew in all the way from Big Island to come to this. Mahalo, Kealoha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can sit. Okay. You can put the, yeah.
Should be on this side.
Any side you like.
Okay. Aloha. Mahalo for having me, and I'm really honored to be here and to share a little bit of my participation in Kalahui. I mostly got involved because of Auntie Kamaka and her encouragement, and Uncle Genesis, and Uncle Paul Nevis, and Mililani, of course. And Auntie Kamaka was kind of Mililani's kahu, and was real encouraged by all of her work. And so we have a lot to be thankful for the former Kia'aina and our last elected Kia'aina and everybody in the whole Lahui, because it really was the kupuna who really brought all of that consciousness, and Kalahui was and has always been a leader in helping to educate the overall Lahui. I'm going to talk a little bit about the United Nations work, because I did have the honor of participating with the Kalahui international team. Like you'll hear Mililani talk about the fourth arena, which is the Kanaka to the world, the relationship of us to all other nations in the world. So in 1998, I had an opportunity. Well, actually, I wasn't really given a choice. I was sent to the United Nations to participate in, at that time, it was the highest level of the UN that we had gone to. Because remember, in 1998, there was no permanent forum on Indigenous peoples. There was no there was no declaration on the rights of Indigenous people. Back then, we were in a working group, and we were working on drafting the language for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. There was an opportunity Mililani came to me and she asked me if I would, do this. There was an opportunity because we also belong to another group called UNPO, which is the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. That organization is an international organization and a non-governmental organization. They represent over 400 million people, maybe even more, who had no voice in the United Nations prior to the declaration, yeah. So they had come up with a plan, and that plan was to have about 5 of us, Tibet, Hawaii, shucks, I'm trying to remember. I'll remember in a minute, but there were about 5 of us. Kabinda, non-governmental organizations technically, to go forward and to enter the Human Rights Commission itself. Because that's the major body where you're allowed to not only name your oppressor, but describe to that body the form of oppression that you are suffering from. So we went under agenda item that is really originally created for Palestine, Hawaii did. Palestine, which that agenda is called the rights of peoples who are under foreign occupation and alien domination. So we were under another name of another NGO who gave us the time to speak. So they did not know that we were actually Kalahui Hawaii. They thought that we were another NGO. In the meantime, it was the 50th anniversary of the Human Rights Commission itself and the 100th anniversary of our annexation, unlawful annexation. So the idea was for us to go and speak about our occupation, actually, under foreign domination and an alien nation, being the United States of America. When you're in the lower working groups, you are not allowed to say your oppressor's name. So, for example, we couldn't say the United States of America is doing this to us. We would have to say that country in the north with the symbol of the eagle is oppressing us. And a couple times, Kaylee and myself, we used to tag team a little bit, because you don't want to get gavelled, because if you get gavelled, you cannot speak. So what we would do is we would say, slip, and say it a little bit, you know, like, I mean, the United States, oh, I'm sorry, the country in the north with the eagle as a symbol. And we would get gavelled, and we'd say, no, we didn't say America. Madam Chair, we didn't say America. We didn't say America, Madam Chair. And then she'd be like, Talahui Hawaii, Talahui, you are out of order, sit down, you know. And so we get cut off, but that's how you had to do it. So going to the Human Rights Commission was a major point, because it was the first time we would be able to say it. So, and let me just back up a moment. Back then, we were actually just trying to be considered peoples with the S. So, I mean, we were considered populations by the United Nations. And some of our indigenous brothers and sisters would stand up and say, there are populations of mosquitoes, but we are peoples. And the reason why we had to fight for that, I mean, this is only in 1998, okay? Even though that's a long time ago, but still. Peoples, under UN international law, peoples have a right to self-determination. It is peoples with an S. And actually, one of the kupuna from Aotearoa, we led a walkout one time because they would not, they kept all of the major oppressive countries, Canada, New Zealand, US, they're called the Kansas group. They form a block and they try to block us, right? They kept refusing to call us peoples, and they wouldn't put the S in peoples. It's not a comma S, it's an S, peoples. So all peoples, so in that walkout, what we did was we went and printed S's. And to all the nations that were supportive of us, we would put an S on their desk. But the ones who didn't, they didn't get one. And we sat outside until the United States State Department came up and at one point and said, hey, Kealoha, do you guys know when you might want to go back in? I said, I don't know, sir. Do you know when you're going to put the S in? And, you know, and so eventually they had to capitulate. So it was just like, to understand this, 300 million people were denied a right to have their voice heard in the United Nations because of typography, because of spelling an S. So I'm just trying to say that to give context of how far we've come. So anyhow, when we went there, we have 5 minutes to speak. There's a huge clock and you can't go over it. So you have to edit every little unnecessary word. And so the International Treaty Council, Indian Treaty Council, some of their representatives helped us along with UNPOST to train us to know what to say. The other thing that can happen to us in that arena is that the United States could stand up and try to shut you down. They could stand up and say, Madam Chair, you know, or, Mr. Chairman, they are not peoples, they have no right to speak, they're not da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. So I had all this training about what am I supposed to say if the United States shuts us down. So I was very nervous, and to be really frank, I used to be very nervous about public speaking, and I used to throw up. I used to have to throw up before I went, used to speak. So I was really sick that day because this was the 50th anniversary and of the Human Rights Commission itself. So every government was going to be in that room. And I went into the bathroom to get sick and to pule on the floor, I'm like, asking for Akua to abide with us and be present and to speak for us. So up that my number came up, and actually what I heard on the speaker in them announce, "Honorable Representative of Hawaii, you have the floor." And I was looking around thinking, who's that? And the Indian Treaty Council guy goes, "Babe, that's you. Your mic's on here. Boom, 5 minutes. Boom." And in that prayer, in that bathroom, when I prayed, Akua said, "You must say aloha at the beginning and the end of your speech. And let me worry about the middle." And that's a true story. So immediately, I didn't know what else to say, so I was like, "Aloha," like that. And you know what? The entire body said aloha back to me. Like, like they all came to Hawaii and went to a luau, so they were like, "Aloha." And looking back at the old record, the translators never translated it. They just put aloha. So I read, and basically it was to expose the United States for the occupation of Hawaii and the illegal annexation of our country. So that was the first moment that we had been able to actually say those words. And it's, really largely to the intuition of Mililani to take that opportunity with UNPO, because there were only 5 of us and we can be shut down. And Angola attempted to shut down Cabinda, and the other countries did attempt to shut down the speakers from UNPO. Now, what ironically happened, and maybe mahalo ke Akua, was that the United States was not in the room. And so no one challenged me. In fact, the chairman, who was the first South African chairman of the Human Rights Commission ever, which was another amazing blessing. And he sent me a note. And when they send you the note, it's nerve-wracking because you don't know what the note says, because you only have that 5 minutes, and you need to have that 5 minutes or they'll shut your microphone off. And what he said was, "Please speak slowly for the translators." And I was like, okay, slow down. So they just said, "Just slow down, babe, just slow down." So I kept repeating, "The United States of America." That's how I slowed down, so I would articulate every word as I went along. And when I got done, I basically said exactly what the Pules told me, what Akua said to say. I said aloha. And the people stood up because they couldn't believe that America was not in the room. And they were looking around like this, but they just stood up to applaud. And then, of course, the mayhem happened because the media just rushed us. And then they took us outside. And then we were outside because we can't disturb the plenary environment. So the important part here is that America they come in the international arena. America has a huge presence. And they walk around with like a delegation of 25 people, lawyers and stuff. So while I was being rushed out away from the plenary, the United States was walking in, and they said to me, "Oh, hello, Miss Pisciotta. What are you doing here so early?" And I had the distinct pleasure of saying, "Oh, aloha, Mr. State Department. I'm sorry you missed our testimony. We've read already. And if you like, I'll give you a copy of our speech later." And he said, "What do you mean you read already?" And I said, "Under agenda item such and such, you know, the one about peoples who are occupied under foreign domination and by an alien nation." And his face went like this. Yeah, it was like, Kealoha, U.S. was not there. So the United States later on, though, was not happy that that happened. We made sure that they got a copy of our speech. And then they chased us around Geneva for a long time, for about 4 days or something, and I wouldn't agree to meet with them. And they came to my room and they would put, notice United States wishes an audience with Miss Pisciotta at their embassy. And so I agreed only to meet with them because, just so you know, I mean, some of the indigenous people that come there, they're fleeing their countries, so they're in a danger of their countries can hurt them. And luckily, there are good places in in Geneva where you can seek asylum and things like this. So I didn't really, we didn't know what they were wanting, and I was kind of afraid to meet with them. So eventually, UNPO negotiated a meeting in a safe place with many people, and so we were allowed to talk. And at that point, the State Department and the Department of Justice, that's who we met with. And we had UNPO witnesses to witness the interaction. And basically, the United States said, "You people voted. You people cannot come here and say those things." The first thing I said was, "Who speaks like that? You people? Who are you talking about?" I said, "It's peoples also with an S." And basically the conversation was them just trying to kind of bully us and intimidate us. And, the truth of the matter was we have a right to speak, and the denial of self-determination is everyone's, concern. Sorry you weren't in the room. We would have said what we were going to say, whether you were or not. And basically, they even said things to me like, "We know you're people. We know you're all divided." And, at the time I was like, "No, we're not divided. What are you talking about, right?" And I said, "Well, then name the factions." And you know what? He did. And so I kind of puni a little bit, and I said, "You know what? We're not divided on the big questions of self-determination, which concern you. The rest of it is our business, and it's internal, and it's none of your business to worry about." Right? So we're allowed to have difference, and that's not your concern. The only concern you have is that we're entitled, and we know it, to our right to self-determination, and that's what we're here about. So it kind of went like that. It was a little contentious, and they're very crazy. Like you think, "Gee, you're from the State Department?" They're kind of, I don't know. And, we just explained, look, many of these things are your rules. When you created the state of Hawaii, you made some mistakes, and let us just point it out. You didn't have title. And so you had to make that workaround, which is that you create the state to be the trustee over our aina. But nevertheless, we're still named as the beneficiaries. So we had treaties with you, and we know that, and so are the metes and bounds of our territory defined. So we're actually not just a nation, we're a nation state. And that's what's true, because there are nations, and nations are just collections of people with commonality, right, under international law. A common language, a common culture, a common history. That's what a nation is. But actually, what we are is a nation state, deserving of a seat at the United Nations to vote, as are most of the indigenous people around the world. They are nation states. They are a nation and a collective group of people with a common goal, and they have a territory. And so we can't forget that, you know. The recommendation when I came home to report back to the people, and by the way, the people included Uncle Kekuni Blaisdell, Bumpy, Francis Boyle, all of the leading groups. So back then we would report to everyone. And so that was the idea, was to report what had been done. And I want to say something, because, you know, I hear sometimes the idea that we are not indigenous people. And what I want to say is, I think I understand the argument that we don't want to just be stuck in the indigenous arena. But what I need to say is that those are 300 million, or 400 actually, or more million people that we are brothers and sisters to. So we should be in there because it's the right thing to do. But more importantly, it's not mutually exclusive. Like if you're indigenous, you can't have been an indigenous self-governing nation. You can be both. And in fact, Hawaii and Kalahui Hawaii provided all of the studies called what are known as the treaty studies under the United Nations to show that indigenous nations had treaties and should be nation states. Because not only Hawaiians, but you know what the UN said? Hawaii is the clearest example of this, that we have indigenous nations who are self-governing, had a territory, and they should be nation states. You know what I'm saying? So people around the world recognize us for that. And those of them who participate in, there's indigenous people who've been participating for, gosh, 30 years now, you know? So I just wanted to say that. And also, the United States, people say the UN doesn't have any teeth. It's not true. If one of those nations decided to say, I want to recognize Hawaii, we would be recognized. What I do want to say is that you cannot avoid the United Nations either. You cannot just become recognized without the United Nations recognizing you too. You know, I remember someone asking me, oh, sister, why are we going UN? And, you know, I understand that question. It's far from home. I mean, it's literally halfway around the world. What are they going to offer us that we cannot get at home? And the truth is, I said to him, listen, if I declare myself queen and you don't agree, am I queen? The answer is kind of no, right? Same thing, if we declare independence, don't we need the other nations to recognize that also? And the United States really has tried to belittle the international arena and belittle the United Nations. But the United Nations is where an idea and an ideal, such as nonviolence and peace, can be recognized globally. And the fact that Obama signed the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, even though the 4 nations were trying not to, the Kansas states, it does hold water, because in a court of law in the United States of America, where we often have to participate, that has weight. Judges can recognize the international standards, such as clear and informed consent. That's an international law. So all of these things that they're doing without the clear and informed consent of those parties whose names are on it is a violation of international law. So let me just repeat, I have to repeat this because the actual language is, this is the other language, but the basic language is that all peoples, with an S, have a right to freely determine their political status, their cultural and social development. So what else can happen also is that not only should we have had those options, because I believe if I believe that we should continue to go to the Human Rights Commission as well as going to the Indigenous and Permanent Forum, because the Permanent Forum now is on a high level of the United Nations. But I still say that we can still go to the Human Rights Commission to complain about what is happening here. And all of these things, every court case, like the whole Mauna Kea case, I believe should be brought to the UN as a complaint. We need to launch the complaints. We need to actually ask for a special rapporteur to come and look at the condition of Hawaii. And that's where you can ask for that at the human rights level. And get other non-governmental organizations interested and things like that. Like, that's what I actually believe. And I would strongly recommend that a series of the groups come together and agree on a single international position that we can all get along with, and make sure that that position is moved collectively, because we're not in opposition here. If you want independence, you're for self-determination. If you want integration, you're for self-determination. If you want all those, self-determination is a process, not a model. See, we got stuck on models before, and we need to kind of get out of that model, because what it means is our right to choose, and have the United Nations be able to come and observe and make sure that we are not interfered with by the occupying state. So we need to look at that, I think. And despite the fact we have so much to do at home, I believe we should still have an international, some kind of international team and diplomatic corps who is made up of multiple entities from multiple groups with a common vision for our right to be truly free and to have our territory and our nation recognized. I mean, those are just two goals, but they're huge, right? And the one other thing we have to caution about is that would be a form of decolonization process. And one caution is, one of the major debates, and I'm sure Mililani could probably talk to this way more better than I can, being up in the Permanent Forum that she's been in up all that time, is the idea that we are peoples, we are Native Hawaiian peoples, but under the kingdom, we are not only Kanaka, because the kingdom had, Hawaiian let me say this, Hawaiian is a nationality, it's not a race, right? And we know that because of the kingdom, because we had multiple ethnicities that actually naturalized back then and became a member, subject and citizen of the kingdom. Like, I know that I am, and most of us are. You know why? Because we never unkingdom ourselves. We're only occupied. So back in the day, the argument was, are indigenous people the self-indetermination? Is it only indigenous people? Or is it, but for us, it's more than that. We're a nation, state. We have multiple ethnicities, and we have to protect those peoples too. So you gotta think a little bit about outside the box, but ponder it, you know, that we actually have metes and bounds. In fact, Papahana Mokuakea is within our treaty bounds, all the way out to Palmyra. Palmyra is in the kingdom. Palmyra doesn't belong to Nature Conservancy. I'm just saying. It's part of our territory. And so those are established. That's why when I testified at the DOI, I was saying, why are you here? The letter was sent to the Department of State and Justice. Who needs to be here is state and justice, not interior. And not to say that we're putting down what interior does, because many of the Indian tribes are within the interior. We're not. And I just want to add one more thing. I don't know how much time I have, but one more thing is that when Hawaii became a state, if you go back and look at the old congressional debates, They didn't want us to become a state. And believe it or not, our allies at that time were the Southern senators, like Senator Byrd. And if you read some of their testimony, they're saying, you can't just go take over another nation, especially one way across the blue water, because there's something known as the Blue Water Clause, that's recognized internationally. So you have to kind of be either a colony or a territory if you're across. You're not a part of the actual United States, right? And they said, someday those people are going to want it back. So that's why Alaska became the 49th state, and then the 50th state. We couldn't become that until the Solicitor General of the United States made a workaround. And that was to put all of our land in trust and make the state the trustee. And here was the workaround. Just don't give them the right to sue. And I know Kalahui, back in the day, used to fight for the right to sue the trustee. So we have that now. And that's something that we as a people need to decide when and how we should eventually maybe have to sue the trustee. But that's a deeper discussion. But nevertheless, we should, I believe, continue to make our voice known, our presence known, and our nation's statehood known. And continue our effort to raise the standard of aloha, for all people. Because when we ho'opuka, they ho'opuka too. Many of the Native Americans understand that. And because we are not, quote unquote, recognized, that gives us a power that if we ho'opuka, they can go to. Because they should be recognized as a nation state too. It doesn't matter the fact that the United States is occupying them too. So if we become free, that frees others. And so I don't, it's not that I don't, I guess what I want to say is I think we want to come from the position of power on that and come from the position of freeing all people. Not just that we're not a tribe. Doesn't matter. Yeah, they aren't either. You know what I mean? Like they don't want to have to be that. But this is the only way they know how. But because we're free from that, because we're not recognized. And we don't need to be recognized. The federal government already has a relationship with what does Robin always say, 144 laws. And that's true. U.S. has all those laws, because wherever it's Native American, Alaska Native, they say Native Hawaiian also. So we should capitalize on not only those relationships that we have with the United States, but continue to hold our ultimate goal, which is total freedom from the occupying government. So anyways, mahalo for listening, and thank you. I had a list of things. Oh yeah, sorry. I can.
You just talked about a special rapporteur.
Yeah.
With that job, what is their authority and what would be, what do you know about it?
Well, we've had special rapporteurs come. Mililani worked on getting special rapporteurs from different entities. But from the Human Rights Commission, I think that we can come and ask that special rapporteur. We can kind of name the conditions, I think, of what we need them to do. Do they need to validate the occupation? Do they need to validate the human rights allegations that we're saying? How the state is interfering with the affairs of people's with the right to self-determination. There's a lot of different things, and I think that we should collectively work with the other groups to come up with what that is. And ask the international experts, what's the best thing that we should do? And for me, all I know is when I went there, I didn't realize all these things that are out there and that our people could really, really help with and bring strength to, too. I mean, we feel real weak, but actually we're quite strong, you know. In the international arena, the Maoris, the Six Nations, and Hawaiians are very strong, and the Alaska Natives, actually, the ones not under the Angsa and stuff like that. They're very, very strong, and we lead. The reason why we lead is because we're under the biggest, baddest bullies. That's one thing I told the United States is I said, you know what? If you openly aggress on our people, you will be seen as a mad dog that you are. Because you know what? The Hawaiian people, we come from peace. People come to our shores and swim in our waters and eat at our luau's. And I said, when I opened my speech, I said aloha, and everyone said aloha back. So I told the United States, I mean, I just kind of wanted to be sure that they're not going to try act up, you know, because they're threatening. It's like, but why don't you try something new? Join us for peace. And that's the way we got to come at them, because they don't know peace. We do. So we don't judge them, we just invite them. Yes, Oana. Yeah. Yeah.
So repertory is the root word is report. So that would be someone who comes to make an objective report, maybe similar to the one that President Cleveland sent back then. Yeah.
Right.
So they're not, the thing that would be concerning to me is if they came to a decision. That we don't want that. You know, but that they make a report.
Yeah. Yeah, and then from that report, we continue to, yes. Because that's, their job would be to oversee and make sure that the international standards are upheld. You know, like even if we had a referendum to determine independence or whatever, we would need them to come and observe it. Because, you know, if I were to ask the academics to do some research, what I would ask them to do is do research on what happens to countries who actually attain independence. For example, start with India. Usually the occupier starts a civil war because they don't leave peacefully. So we would need to prepare ourselves so that peace exists even through transition. So that's all I'm saying. You know, like I want to hear, what we need academics to do, you know, is actually write those kind of useful white papers and present them to the Lahui so that we know what, you know, what are the, look at many nations and see what happens when they were transitioning. Because it's like Uncle Paul's always saying, what we need is not to worry that we're fighting in a state system, because that's the definition of occupation, is that you operate under a system you don't agree with. So what we need the international guys to do is also to start reporting all of these abridgments and violations to the United Nations in a collective, you know, saying these are the violations, these are how we are being interfered with, we need United Nations observation and support. You know what I mean? We're trying to decolonize, and we're trying to get through this process that United Nations, because occupation by definition is unlawful. So we don't even need to say that illegal occupation, even though we said it in our speech lots of times. Really, it's by definition, it's not lawful. So, you know, we need to stand on those things and continue to tell them that we are occupied, and we don't wish to be, and we wish to make a peaceful transition. And this is how we want to do it. Because all of these state agencies, their job is nothing but hanaino, and to screw up our eventual unification for self-determination. Because they're scared, as they kind of should be, although we still gonna aloha them. because they're still our ohana. But the thing is they need to be straight, stop interfering with our stuff. Oha is one big hana ino, working for the man, not working for themselves. And our brothers and sisters who are over there, we aloha them. But we want to encourage them to start working with their brothers and sisters instead of working for the man. So anyway, sorry. I don't mean to be all. Just saying. Wow.